I don't care if it's shaped like a frickin' rectangle. I don't care. Okay. But the annoying part of receiving some of these emails is,
First off, I want to say that I completely respect and actually listen to Steve's work on his main channel. Everything is going to be linked in the description below. But I appreciate his work and tune into his work because he's sharing stories from the people pretty much on a regular basis. And that's another form of coming to your own conclusion on various subjects. His specific subject is the existence of Sabe, or what people call Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever different territories names come with. The indigenous people's word that has been more accepted by various communities is the term Sabe. So that's the term I'll be using in this video. I made a video on my perspective of the Sabe already. It's linked in the description. So if you haven't heard that yet and you're completely in the dark about this subject, I would say first go visit that video, then come back and revisit this one, because this is going to expand on top of that subject and address Steve directly, because his recent video was a response to the so-called flat earth community. I don't necessarily say that I'm a part of that community, because that's another version of another trap altogether. There's a lot of other downfalls to the idea of that community. He explains a lot of them in this video, where he's talking about people get really extreme and they start spinning their wheels on one subject.
many of these flat earthers are so consumed with the earth is flat, and if you don't accept the earth is flat, you're going nowhere and you're not going to get any information at all, because you're stuck in that place of being they call this place a globe.
And then you have different factions of people who are, Christian flat earthers, then totally science-based flat earthers, and you have basically whatever perspective, whatever angle that they're comfortable with. A lot of them take that angle. What I'm saying is that there's nothing wrong with that. There comes a point where it becomes counterproductive when people take that angle and then start to dismiss other angles, other things that are connected to those storylines.
I don't know how many of you are. There's a good handful of people out there that are preaching the flat earth shit. And you people don't understand. You'll never understand anything until you accept the fact that we're not on a globe, and quit calling it a globe. Holy shit, you guys. Get your heads out of your frickin' asses and move on.
So for example, like I mentioned in the last video, I was sharing a lot of information on my journey to realizing that the universe was not a heliocentric universe. We're not living on a globe Earth. I was one of the first channels to start to research and expand upon these subjects back in 2015. So I have a lot of work that's already uploaded to this channel that goes deeply into this subject. But my perspectives were not at all limited to the idea of flat Earth or the not globe Earth. My perspective always sat in the root, in the core of the people, what's happening to the people. The illusion of the heliocentric universe was just a part of that. It's a big part of it, but it's not everything. There are so-called flat earth channels out there that made this realization seem like it was everything and nothing else should be spoken on. So when I brought up issues dealing with the people on the streets, dealing with the system of racism, white supremacy, the historical events dealing with the Aboriginal people around the world, how this is also connected to illusions, mind control, so on and so forth, all dealing with the so-called flat earth. People in the so-called flat earth community were dismissing my work and dismissing me as a person, because just like the New Age community calls that kind of work low energy, they call it, if you're talking about racism, anything dealing with person-to-person kind of experiences, dealing with the system in any form, they just want to call you low energy. And like I said in the last video, a lot of this information is presented or defended against that way in order to put more attention on whatever their focus is. And I'll address that in this video too, because Steve does that in so many ways, and he kind of contradicts himself in this video where he says, flat earthers get caught up on, it's only about flat earth and that's the only thing that matters.
Get your heads out of your frickin' asses and move on.
So you can see how he kind of dismisses in many ways flat earthers in general because they focus too much on the idea of flat earth. But he's not really aware of the fact that he's doing the same thing with the Sabe. If he had, millions of people around the world who are all about the Sabe, and the Sabe is the center of what we should be focusing on, and they've been lying to us about Sabe. If the whole universe was based upon the Sabe, then he would have a following of people doing the same thing, focusing only on that subject. But the Sabe storyline is not as big as the non-heliocentric universe storyline, so people don't go that hard. But the concept is the same. The focus of only being about the Sabe and pretty much nothing else matters is contradictory. It's the same. He talks about Sabe solely and how this is about the people. And once this information gets out, more people will be more aware of certain things, whatever it is. But, flat earthers are doing the same thing, just on a larger scale. So that's one point that I wanted to make in this video, was the contradiction of calling out flat earthers for the way they do things, but his channel is basically doing the same thing so-called flat earthers are doing. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with that. That's just to point it out. Like, there's nothing wrong with sharing information only about Sabe. There's nothing wrong with sharing information only about flat earth. What I was saying in my previous video is that what happens when you start to get enveloped in only one idea at the expense of other storylines, which is why I'm making this video right now, at the expense of other perspectives. So his approach to Sabe, and by his own words, being open to storylines that help the people, his approach from the perspective of the video of which I'm sharing right now, his entire approach is coming at the expense of the non-heliocentric or flat earth storyline. And that's where I'm saying things can get a little iffy and get a little counterproductive, because ultimately we're all talking about the same thing. We're all talking about being lied to by the government, lied to by the establishment, lied to about so many different things. And that's the main point. Too many times on the YouTube circles, we get caught up in our one little corner of perspective. And once that corner starts to get challenged, we start to bite back in defense of our little corner. And my last video was expanding upon the dangers of that, because it's actually slowing down progress. It's slowing down time. And a lot of that's happening because people are not doing the work of venturing out of their little corner to go see how all these other storylines are connected. I'm not saying that I know all the angles and how all the stories are connected. I'm just saying that they are very much connected in some kind of way, and we'd be more of help to each other if we start to expand upon how they do connect, instead of trying to defend our one little angle at the expense of somebody else's perspective. Like I said, this happened in a microcosm within the so-called flat earth community, when I would bring about the story of the system of racism and white supremacy in the flat earth, and people were attacking me saying that you're divisive. This is all about flat earth. What are you bringing all this racism? Flat earth has nothing to do with racism. I'm just like, oh my God, what is going on here? It's ridiculous. So those videos are still uploaded. You can go see for yourself, but whether they're like coming at you hard with those attacks or passive aggressively, just by ignoring you or dismissing your work, because you had these whole flat earth communities that would literally act like my channel and my work didn't exist, for the simple fact that I also connected it to all the other storylines of illusions that were out there, the illusion of racism, white supremacy, and racism overall, and that whole thing, the illusions that are out there beyond the idea of flat earth. People who solely focused on flat earth completely dismissed my work and pretty much, swept my channel under the rug as if it didn't exist. Nothing wrong with that. Nobody has to pay attention to any of the work that I'm doing on here. But to have that happen and have people see that is another thing. It exists. So what I'm saying is that with that happening, we have to realize, is that productive or is that counterproductive? And why is that happening? Largely why that's happening is because people are not doing the work outside of their own little comfort zone. So Steve is in the heart of his comfort zone with Sabe, and he's getting hit with these emails constantly about flat earth people telling him flat earth information because he asks for emails. That's his whole demographic. His whole platform is based upon receiving emails from the people and stating, if you have any information that is helpful to the people, send it in. Now he's talking about, information based upon Sabe, but he doesn't say that all the time. And also beyond that, if you really go into breaking down the illusions of the heliocentric lies, you'll start to realize that that information is very much so helpful to the people. And it starts to connect a lot of other dots. And that's another thing that he mentions in his videos is these puzzle pieces, putting together these puzzle pieces. What I'm saying directly to Steve in this video is that how flat earth connects to the Sabe existence is all this extra land that could be out there. The Arctic land that I've broken down on my channel, how like he said he worked on boats before and he saw boats go over the horizon. Well, I worked on boats for 7 years, and then I've broken down the story of the science behind why that's just not true. The story that we're told on why that happens. But beyond that, the maps or the charts that the military uses to travel on the ocean are all the same maps by the same map maker from the 1500s, Mercator. And back then in the 1500s, Mercator did a map of the Arctic Circle where there was a whole bunch of land up there. And here we are today where our modern maps have scrubbed that existence away. And he's not the only one who put together maps where there's land in the idea of the North Pole. So if there's land up there, there could be more than that. There could be these portals, and portals are something that are also mentioned by the people in the so-called Sabe community. Who's to say that the North Pole area couldn't be one giant portal? So there's one possible connection of the Sabe to the idea of flat earth. Beyond that, you have the idea of Antarctica. And in the flat earth perspective, the ice wall that goes around the earth, and how a lot of people in the so-called flat earth community talk about them being more land past the ice wall. Who's to say Sabe doesn't come from those lands, and maybe there's just a few that live here, or maybe they go in between the portals from here to there. We don't know, but we can't have this discussion if this entire discussion is just dismissed because of illusory science pumped by the system that is lying to all of us. See, this is what I went into in my last video, talking about the exponential deflection, the dismissal that happens, the discussions that don't get made because these discussions, these subjects are dismissed on a large scale. Somebody like Steve, who has a following, a huge following in the Sabe community, in the YouTube community in general, has a huge following. That one person, Steve, that one person dismissing, as he did, flat earth in that video, affects millions and millions of people. It's exponential deflection. So those millions of viewers that tune into his work are also going to dismiss it for the millions of people that they are in communication with. That's why I said, if you're a content creator or putting out information on a massive scale like this, the perspectives that you have matter a lot more than, just talking one-on-one with somebody. It sends exponential shockwaves through, I don't like using this word, the collective consciousness, but the intellectual discussion across all the people who are discussing all intelligence. And the majority of the time that we dismiss this information is because of our own ignorance, because of our own ego, because of our own arrogance that defends that ego. And we allow our egos to get in the way of not only our own progression, but when you're creating content like this, your own ego gets in the way of millions and millions of other people's ability to expand their perspective, expand their puzzle pieces.
And I've already made it clear in the past, I don't give a shit if the earth is shaped like a pyramid. I don't care. It's working for me. It's working. I'm alive. Water's flowing into the ocean, fish are spawning, the sun is making absolute stunning, beautiful sunrises and stunning, frickin' beautiful sunsets. The mountains, the forests, the oceans are absolutely chock full of life and beautiful. It's working. I don't give a shit if the earth is flat.
Another thing that happens in order to defend our own egos is that we have this tendency to play both sides when it's dealing with stories that are as intense as the flat earth discussion.
I got a hell of a time picking up Wi-Fi 2 miles from my house, and they expect me to believe that they had clear audio and video direct from the moon, live stream on television in 1960, whatever it was. Spent a shit pile of time on the ocean. I commercial fished, one of my first jobs ever, and I don't know how many ships I saw disappear over the horizon. End of story for me.
You can see how those two perspectives are completely different. And why would somebody do that? Basically just to cater to certain people because the work hasn't been done. And the most part is really just to cater to your own ego. And really, he's an honest person. So he's sharing like the perspectives that he's getting on both sides. He's sharing all the information that he's been presented with. The only thing is, his downfall is that since he hasn't done the work, the ego needs to be defended, and it's defended by arrogance. And then once that ego starts to get defended by arrogance, it needs to be held up by some kind of structure. And the structure that individuals usually default to is the structure of the same system that has been lying to them about that very subject and about other subjects. But if you don't do the work in realizing that this system is lying to you across the board, then in many cases you'll end up defending their work without even realizing it. So that's what he's doing there when he starts to say that, you know, I've seen ships go over the horizon with my own eyes. Well, yeah, that's true. They go over the horizon, but does that mean that you live on a globe? No, that just means they went out of your sight over the horizon. That doesn't mean the horizon is curved in a sphere. And for people who have questions about that, I would say check out the YouTube channel Phuket Word, who does some very good scientific examples, breakdowns of perspective and so many other things. But in relation to the horizon thing, you're really dealing with perspective and the line of sight shifting over distance. And it has nothing to do with ships disappearing over the curve of a sphere. This was actually my first introduction to flat earth in general, because like I said, I worked on a ship for 7 years. And yes, at that same time, I did see ships also go over the horizon, but my default wasn't to say, oh, well, that's the end of the story. You know, there is no flat earth information that needs to be paid attention to because I've seen ships go over the horizon. No, I needed to go in there. Well, mostly because I had already spent all that time in the army, so I know how much these assholes lie across the board. So I had kind of a head start on, you know, maybe I should check this out. But beyond that, with my own eyes, my own proof was when we would see things go over the horizon, you could look into the giant binoculars that the lookouts have available to them, and the image would come back into view. You could see what you were looking at before, which means that it didn't go over any curvature horizon. And then beyond that, once you start looking even further, there's an actual math, a curvature math, where ships are supposed to disappear at particular distances. And once I started to discover the curvature math and equate that to the distances that I would see ships with my own eyes and binoculars, but with my own eyes, I was able to see ships, sailboats that weren't more than 20, 30 feet high at over 22, 23, 24 miles away. Now, based upon the height that I was on my ship, the height that the sailboat is on the horizon at that distance, when you tie in the curvature math to all those equations, that's not supposed to be possible. My eyes are not supposed to see that ship, because that ship or that boat, that sailboat, is supposed to be so many tens of feet below the supposed spherical horizon. So that was my first introduction to, okay, now I have to look into this, because if that is a proof, that's just a scientific proof to me. And that's really all I needed. One solid scientific proof. I was already questioning the moon landing, because that shit was just, and so many other people out there question the moon landing. But to have solid scientific evidence that we are not living on a sphere, not jumping to conclusions and saying that we live on a flat earth that has an edge and shit lives on the edge, not jumping to that space and then being like, oh yeah, well, if that's the case, then we live on a flat earth, then all this other shit's going down, at the edge, where's the edge? All this stuff, all the garbage that people have to spew at you in order to defend their own ignorance, not jumping to that conclusion. Just saying, okay, well, now I have more work to do. I have more homework, more research to do. This is a good foundation to start on, because I've experienced this with my own eyes, from my own experience. So once I started to see that curvature math, then that's when I went into researching the historical evidence of Mercator and the maps or charts that were available to people. And that's when I stumbled upon the lands that are at the North Pole. So here's another realization of being lied to by the same system, and why they would lie to us about land, why they would lie to us about these maps. Because maps are powerful. Having maps of the world is a strategic war move. This is why the monarchy and all kinds of other people used to steal maps and hide maps, because there weren't that many cartographers that were out there who did this work. So if you had information about the lands of the world, you could potentially conquer the world. So any kind of power group would take these maps and hide them for their own protection and for their own use in wartime. So to discover that they were hiding and lying about land at the North Pole, that was another solid step that I could stand on and jump into from the introduction, jump into the deeper research of the non-heliocentric universe, or what people are calling the flat earth and the flat earth community and all that other stuff. That's a different world. I don't affiliate with that space because there's too many attachments there. The flat earth community and all that other stuff, like I said, once you start getting in that ball of, defending these arguments, there's a lot of downfalls that come from that space. And you actually start to work against yourself the same way that somebody who's unaware of this information works against themselves with the ignorance and the arrogance to defend their own ego. There starts to develop this flat earth ego, the same way in the New Age community, New Agers develop this New Age ego. So to close this all out, I just wanted to share this information to show the parallels between various modes of thought and the overall dismissing of information and how that's counterproductive to everything.
All right, move on. Keep going, keep growing. Get some more knowledge. You're sitting there doing the same thing a lot of these Sasquatch researchers are doing. You're screaming the same sermon. Each of you are screaming and you're chasing your frickin' tail in a circle and you're going like this. You're going nowhere. You're going nowhere. You might as well be one of those people standing on a frickin' egg carton box on the corner in downtown New York, screaming at the people on a sidewalk that the earth is flat. Like I said, it's a beautiful place. The forests are green, the mountains are epically beautiful, the sunsets are stunning as hell. It's working for me. I don't give a shit what the shape is.
So you can see how Steve has to defend his work with Sabe in relation to the idea of flat Earth, the same way New Agers have to defend their idea of the universe and their work with aliens and the heliocentric universe at the expense of flat Earth. It's the same thing. They have to dismiss, they have to shut down, they have to hit you with ad hominem, they have to laugh at you in order to protect their own investment, in order to protect what they have been going into for so long. And like I'm saying, there's nothing wrong with the work that they're doing for the most part, like individual New Agers and all that other stuff. There's a lot of work and positive stuff that you come across in the so-called New Age community. Just as there's a lot of positive stuff that comes from realizing that there are other beings out there like the Sabe. But once you start to develop this deflective truth, this kind of egotistical approach to other perspectives, that's when it starts to become counterproductive. So you start to deflect from other information streams because you have this one particular truth. You're closing yourself off to the other puzzle pieces that are available to the bigger picture. And that's where time starts to slow down. That's where progress starts to slow down. And that's where a lot of these other storylines start to get dismissed. And ultimately, a lot of work doesn't get done because the individuals who are supposed leaders in this movement of information aren't doing the work themselves. And the people who are following these leaders who are not doing this work, this is where I'm saying the exponential growth, you're going to have exponential non-growth or de-evolution, because these people who are following these leaders who aren't doing the work are going to do the same thing that the leaders are doing and themselves default to the idea of the status quo. They're going to default to the group think. And if the group think is being influenced by these leaders who are not doing this work, over time, people or groups of people who are claiming to be for the people, for the progression of things against this system that has been lying to us, end up being just as damaging, just as dangerous as the systems who are solely designed to keep us from understanding certain storylines and all the other storylines that are interconnected.